This Marquee Dragon video is sponsored by Shattered Crystal, game codes, and items.
Hello, I'm Marquee Dragon, also known as Marcus Eikenberry in real life. And I got a really interesting question the other day. So I had somebody ask me, what did we do for playing games before the internet? You know, multiplayer games. Well, the answer is pretty simple. It was like Monopoly. But after Monopoly, after board games, actually board games have continued all the way through, and maybe I should share a few of my favorite board games with you. I have some really fun stuff that I like playing that you might actually be interested in, but that'll be a video for another time. So after board games came BBSs, and they were called door games. And so if you can imagine the internet, most of you, have grown up with the internet. And, it's just like I grew up with telephones. I mean, not cordless, but, a wired telephone, cable came straight to my house, and television. And so, I realize that a lot of you guys who watch this channel may have never envisioned a time when there wasn't the internet. But pre-internet, we used to use dial-up, and we used things like Prodigy and, oh gosh, AOL, and there was a few other services out there. And then there was BBSs. Now BBSs were, stands for Bulletin Board System, and they, I don't know when they appeared. I know when they phased out. They started phasing out around the time that the internet started getting really popular, mid-90s. And so probably by about 97, a lot of the BBSs were fading off. By about 99, 2000, a lot of them were gone. And I used to run a BBS. I used to run a BBS called Play Trade Wars Online. And we, well, let me just tell you more about what a BBS is. So a BBS was a computer that a lot of people would have at their home. There are a few commercial services for this stuff, like the AOL, Prodigy, and then there was some other, smaller commercial stuff. But for the most part, it was all all homegrown. And just like there's a lot of fan sites that you go to on the internet for video games, they're not done, the fan sites aren't done by the game companies. They're not typically done by businesses either. They're done by fans of the game, people who really enjoy the game and want to share it. Well, a BBS in many ways was that. And so what you would do is you'd have a modem, and not like your cable modem, well, similar, but not quite. It would hook into your telephone line, and it would take your telephone line the entire time you were online. So I was fortunate that I could afford 2 phone lines, and so I could actually talk on the telephone at the same time I was on a BBS. But most people could not afford 2 phone lines back then. Phone lines were a lot more expensive back then than they are these days. And so you would, the really old ones, you would actually take the phone, the earpiece and the mic, and you would set it into this device that looked like a couple of cups right there, and it would do the screeching tones like a fax machine, back and forth through there, and that would transmit data. And so anyway, I never had one of those. I never had that old, but my first modem was 2400 baud. And that was the unit of measurement. And 2400 baud, I think that at 2400 baud I could download about 1 megabyte in an hour. An hour. So if I had, a lot of the programs and stuff those days were, under a megabyte, and the really big ones were like 5 and 6 megabytes. So it didn't, the economy of scale here, you may still spend an hour downloading, a 2 or 3 gigabyte game, and but you've got much faster speeds these days. And of course we've got things like Netflix and all these things that just require high speed. Back then, we didn't even have, there was no browser on them. In fact, the graphics were called ANSI, and they were different blocks and shapes that you can make with your keyboard. They're high-bit ASCII characters. And so if you want to try making one, open up a TextPad or a text editor, and on a Windows machine, you can hold down Control Alt and then hit 3 numbers on your number pad, and it will come up with a symbol or a letter. And what we used to do is we used to draw with all of these, and we could make some pretty amazing designs. It was actually pretty incredible what you could do, and then you could apply a color to each one of them. And so we made these menus, and you could then, you choose like A, B, C, or D whenever you got to the screen, and you could play a door game or whatnot. So the door games back then, most of them were single player, or they were multiplayer but not simultaneous multiplayer. They were multiplayer one at a time. And so the one that I really enjoyed playing a lot was called Trade Wars Online. And in fact, you can look it up these days. I think they call it Trade Wars 2002. And there are places on the internet where you can go play it. Trade Wars was a game that, these were text games back then too. Oh my God. So barely any graphics. And when they did have graphics, they were ANSI graphics, and it took a while to draw. You'd go see a line, draw, 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 and then you'd have your picture. And so it'd just be a single scene. It wouldn't be anything real elaborate, certainly no motion or anything. And so anyway, with Trade Wars, it was modeled after Star Trek, and it loosely, I mean, they tried not to violate any copyright, although they did have Ferengis in there, and Ferengis were these creatures that like to do commerce and stuff. But it was a game where you would manage your fleet of spaceships, and you would own planets, and you'd get resources from the planets, and then you would fight over planets. And you may set a base on a planet that would have all these fighters and stuff, and so if another player came along to attack, and then that would auto-defend, and it would defend while you were away. Because, like I said, there was no simultaneous play. And so you'd get like 100 turns, or however many turns they set, and you would take your turns, and then you would hang up from the BBS, and you'd let somebody else play. And while you were connected, nobody else could get into the BBS, because typically they only had one phone line. And so I remember that sometimes I would let my computer on redial for hours, and it would set off a tone whenever it connected, and I'd be like, all right, I get to go play my turns. So that's what we did back then. Some other really neat things that we did was there was this network called FidoNet, and it was kind of a precursor to email. And what we could do is we could send a message through this system to somebody else. And so the FidoNet, you'd have to send it to their number and then at a node. And a node was like the same as like an IP address or a web domain. And so what would happen is that, okay, let's say I wanted to send a message to somebody in Australia. So I would write my message on my BBS, and I would put in the address, and it'd be, whatever node, FidoNet, and then, I'd hit send, just like writing a regular email. And then, so when I wrote it on my BBS only made a phone call to another BBS once a night. And this is what you had to do. See, we weren't connected all the time to all the other computers like the internet is today. I had to call another central BBS that did message transfers. And so what it would do is it would call this other BBS, and it would say, hey, I'm such and such BBS, and I've got messages for you. And so it would transmit those messages, and then it would say, do you have any messages for me? And it would receive those messages. And so then, I would get any new messages coming in. But here's the thing, you know how email is instant these days? Well, back then with FidoNet, it could take a week to get a reply. It was still faster than postal mail, but it could really take a week, because that other BBS that I called would then it would wait, and it would wait for other ones to call into it, or it would call out, and it would have to go from place to place to place. And a lot of times, a lot of them didn't want to dial long distance. So they would dial as far as they could go to another BBS that wasn't long distance, that BBS might be able to dial another length further without it being long distance to them either. And so it could take quite a bit of time. So we were also able to play games through FidoNet style stuff, and so we could merge the databases and we could transfer data back and forth, and so we could actually play with other people that were a great distance away, but it could take you a couple of days to get another turn again. So that is kind of the precursor to the internet, and the internet today is a fabulous thing. I mean, we use it for so much I never envisioned. And you know, now we have the massive multiplayer games where I think World of Tanks, I'm pulling this off the top of my head so I might be wrong, but I think they had 135,000 simultaneous players in at one time in one server or server cluster. And they hold the Guinness Book of World Records record for the most players on one server at one time, by the way. And so it has changed a bunch, and I don't know what's going to happen in the future. But the future probably is going to be, we're still going to interact over the internet, but the internet's going to look like a little bit different thing. Maybe it'll be something that just floats in the air, and what I mean by that is that all of us will always be connected. I mean, we're already connected via our phones right now, but even our watches might be connected all the time, and you know, our cars will be connected all the time, and just because it'll all be wireless, and you know, so that may not pertain to games, especially in your car, but who knows? So anyway, thanks for that great question about what kind of games we played before the internet, and they just weren't massive multiplayer. You'd have maybe 30 people in a game at once. That's about as many as you could handle and still get everybody's turns in every day. So, you know, games that were bigger than that, you ended up not playing because it took you several days to get dialed in to take your turns. So, anyway, thanks for the great question. I'm Mark Seikenberry. Take care.